Mom mortgaged her house to fight me in court, all to defend my convicted brother's right to be near my 3 girls. Patrick, my brother, was convicted of pedophilia and served 5 years in prison for assaulting a 7-year-old. But when he got out, my entire family insisted that I let him around my 3 girls. When I declined, they launched a big harassment campaign, including having him show up at my 8-year-old's birthday party with a doll dressed in a swimming costume, forcing me to obtain a restraining order. But then my mother spent her retirement assets on his legal fees to battle me, while the entire family hounded us and filed fake CPS complaints, forcing us to pay him $30,000 to leave us alone. When my brother Patrick was released from prison, my mother contacted me 17 times. I knew exactly what she wanted before I picked it up. She had been preparing me for months with statements about forgiveness and second chances, but there was no way I was allowing a convicted pedophile near my 3 girls. Patrick had served a 5-year sentence for what he had done to his neighbor's daughter. The girl was 7. My oldest kid had just turned 8 years old, but I felt like the family monster for saying no. Mom arrived at my place the morning of his release. She had an entire speech prepared about how he transformed and discovered God. She pulled out a folder containing certificates from jail programs. He finished every course they offered, she stated. This effectively erased what he had done. Where is your Christian heart? I kept my response simple. He was not welcome in my home. Not for supper, not for the holidays, and not for 5 minutes. My girl's safety came first. Mom's expression changed from pleading to outright fury. She spat out. Those are his nieces. You are depriving him his family. The guilt campaign began immediately. My sister Beth called and cried about Patrick having nowhere to go. Every morning, Dad sends me Bible scriptures about forgiveness. Even my Aunt Helen, who lives 3 states away, felt compelled to tell me that everyone deserved a second shot. However, they saved the real manipulation for Sunday dinner. I had stopped at Mom's to pick up my grandmother's ring, which she had been resizing. The whole family was present. Patrick, too. He sat at the kitchen table as if nothing had occurred, as if he had not ruined a child's innocence. My daughter Elise exclaimed, "Uncle Patrick," before I could stop her. She dashed at him, her sisters close following. I've never moved that quickly in my life. I gathered all 3 children and went toward the door. Patrick had the audacity to appear hurt. I only wanted to meet them, he explained softly. I'm their uncle. That was when I lost it. I told him that being blood did not provide him access to my children. I reminded everyone in the room what he had been guilty of. Mom literally covered her ears. Dad grumbled something about lingering in the past. Beth accused me of traumatizing the girls. The smear effort began the next day. Mom informed her church that I was keeping her grandchildren from her. She conveniently left out why. Beth wrote on Facebook about how some people do not comprehend atonement. Several relatives responded with prayer hands and Bible quotes. My phone was inundated with messages from folks who didn't even know the complete situation. Then Patrick began turning up at locations like the grocery store and the park, always maintaining distance and claiming coincidence. He would wave to the females from across the playground. I began capturing everything: date, time, location, and witnesses. My spouse installed security cameras after we noticed him driving by our house 3 times in one day. The breaking point occurred during Jane's birthday party. We rented the community center and invited her to the entire class. Halfway through the cake, Patrick entered with a gift. Mom trailed behind him, smiling as if she had organized something wonderful. Every girl deserves an uncle on her birthday, she stated. Parents began snatching their children and left. One father recognized Patrick from the register website. Within minutes, our daughter's party had been wrecked. Jane cried in the restroom as her classmates' parents murmured in the parking lot. He brought a bathing suit-clad doll as a present. I applied for a restraining order the next morning. That's when the real war began. Mom used her retirement resources to employ Patrick, a lawyer. They claimed I was alienating him from his family. The lawyer contended that Patrick had served his sentence and deserved to see his relatives. My mother testified against me in court. The judge granted a temporary order but warned that it might not last long. Patrick had finished his probation. He wasn't breaking any rules by being near us. The final hearing was scheduled for next month. Meanwhile, familial harassment escalated. Dad began turning up at my husband's workplace, urging him to speak reason into me. Beth attempted to pick up the girls from school, stating I had requested her to. The school had to remove my entire family off the permitted pickup list. Even family I hadn't spoken with in years took sides. Last night I discovered Elise going through old Christmas photos on my phone. Why don't we see Uncle Patrick anymore? She inquired. Grandma says, "You are being rude to him." I wanted to shout. Instead, I hugged her tightly and changed the subject, but I knew this was far from over. The final hearing was in 2 weeks, and Mom had made it clear that she'd mortgage her house to fight me. That's when I realized how far this would go, and I knew I had to get ahead of whatever Mom was planning. The mortgage threat wasn't empty. She'd already spent her retirement savings on Patrick's lawyer. I began calling every family law attorney in town and scheduling consultations. If I could conflict them out by meeting with them first, Mom would have to look elsewhere for representation. My husband took time off work to assist with the girls while I prepared for court, and we enrolled them in after-school programs to reduce the possibility of unexpected family visits. After Beth's pickup attempt, the school principal agreed to personally escort them to the bus. 3 days later, I received a call from my cousin Cheryl, who had always remained neutral in family drama, and she asked if we could meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Cheryl looked exhausted as she sat across from me in the cafe. She looked around uneasily before pulling out her phone. "I need to show you something," she said, scanning through her texts. "Your mother has been organizing the family. She has a group chat." My stomach fell as I read the messages. 23 family members were actively plotting methods to push Patrick and my daughters to communicate. They talked about showing up at school activities, unexpectedly stumbling into us at the supermarket, and even having various relatives petition for grandparent rights to legally overwhelm me. Cheryl slid her phone back into her purse. The worst part was seeing how they talked about me. According to them, I was mentally unstable, vindictive, and poisoning my children against their loving family. Mom had convinced them all that Patrick's conviction was a misunderstanding, and that the girl's family had overreacted. "I have kids too," she added gently. I checked the court records. What did Patrick do? It was not a misunderstanding. I spent the rest of the day screenshotting everything Cheryl texted me. The group conversation revealed their whole playbook, and they intended to load the courtroom with supporting family members, including several aunts and uncles who had prepared character letters for Patrick. Mom had even persuaded my childhood pediatrician to write about how devoted Patrick had been. That evening, I discovered Patrick's truck parked across from our house again, this time with Mom by his side. They sat there for an hour just watching, and when my husband went outside to confront them, they drove away, only to return the next morning. The girls noticed the tension, and Jane inquired as to why we couldn't eat at restaurants anymore. Our lawyer suggested that the repeated surveillance could strengthen our case, but cautioned that family court judges frequently favored reconciliation. Patrick's completion of his sentence worked in his favor, and the system regarded him as rehabilitated. A week before the hearing, I was carrying groceries when I saw a woman observing me from across the parking lot. Elise asked why Grandma couldn't babysit, and I gave her vague excuses about everyone being busy. But kids are smart, and they sensed something was wrong. She approached me as I locked my trunk, introducing herself as Patricia from Child Protective Services. Someone had put in a report about me denying my children access to family. My hands shook as I gave her my lawyer's contact information. Patricia was professional, but thorough. Our lawyer subpoenaed the CPS complaint, which alleged emotional abuse through family alienation. The home visit went well, the girls' rooms were clean, the fridge was stocked, their artwork covered the walls, and they chatted happily with Patricia about school and friends. But I knew this was just another tactic to wear me down. It was no surprise that it came from Mom's address, as she had formally accused me of emotional abuse for protecting my children from a convicted pedophile. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so terrifying. As the hearing approached, Patrick became more daring, jogging past our house every morning, always careful to stay on public property, and waving at the windows, knowing the girls might see. I kept them away from the front rooms, but it meant living like prisoners in our own home. Dad left voicemails about how I was destroying the family. Beth sent long emails about forgiveness and healing. Relatives I'd blocked created new social media accounts to message me. They all sang the same tune. I was cruel, unreasonable, and unchristian. Then came the letters. Mom orchestrated a campaign in which family members wrote. I intercepted the letters addressed to them at our house, but the violation felt profound. They were attempting to manipulate my children directly now. I read each letter before shredding it, and they all followed a template. How much they missed the girls, how sad Uncle Patrick was, and how Mommy was keeping them apart. One aunt even included photos of Patrick looking dejected. My husband installed additional locks and an alarm system, and another sent drawings Patrick had allegedly made for them in prison. I'm curious why the entire family is so invested in defending Patrick's rights. With 23 relatives in a group chat and coordinated letters from everyone. We changed our routes to school and activities, I started grocery shopping in the neighboring town, and we basically went into hiding while living in our own house. The weekend before court, Mom made her biggest move yet. She filed for emergency grandparent visitation rights, painting me as an unstable mother who had cut off family access without cause. She demanded immediate supervised visits with the girls, with Patrick allowed to attend as their uncle. Our lawyer called it a kitchen sink approach. Throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. The emergency petition would be heard alongside our restraining order request, and Mom was hoping that a judge would compromise by denying the restraining order but granting her some visitation. I spent that weekend organizing evidence, security footage, documentation of every encounter, group chat screenshots, character references from teachers and doctors who actually knew. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and drizzling. I dressed carefully, conservatively but not severely, and my husband wore his only suit. We dropped the girls off at school early, my stomach turning at leaving them, even with the new security measures. The courthouse parking lot was full of familiar cars. Patrick sat in the front row of the courtroom with Mom and their lawyer, dressed in a new suit and having gotten a haircut. He looked like a respectable uncle, not someone on the sex offender registry. I recognized aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, who stood in clusters, whispering and giving us dark looks as we passed. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue, the image of a grieving grandmother. Our side of the courtroom was nearly empty, just us, our lawyer, and, surprisingly, Cheryl. She gave me a small nod as we took our seats. Whatever happened today, I wouldn't let them win. When the judge entered, I gripped my husband's hand. Everything we'd fought for came down to this moment. My daughter's safety was at stake, and I was prepared to fight with everything I had. The judge's gavel struck the bench, and the hearings began. Our lawyer presented the security tape first, which showed Patrick's persistent surveillance of our home. The timestamp suggested a pattern of escalating conduct. Mom's lawyer countered by arguing that a man had the right to jog on public streets. During the first recess, I noticed Beth in the hallway making phone calls, and she kept glancing at me while whispering urgently into her phone. My husband stayed close to me, his hand on my back as we navigated through clusters of hostile relatives. When Mom took the stand, she painted herself as a heartbroken grandmother denied access to her grandchildren. Our lawyer's cross-examination revealed the reality beneath her facade. She showed images of happier times, family gatherings when Patrick played with relatives, and her tears seemed genuine as she detailed how I had torn the family apart. When asked directly about Patrick's conviction, Mom claimed the victim's family had blown things out of proportion, and Patrick had simply been showing affection. Several relatives in the gallery nodded along with her delusions, and the judge ordered a brief recess to review evidence. In the hallway, Dad cornered my husband near the water fountain, and I watched his face turn green as he gestured wildly, clearly attempting to pressure my husband into dropping the case. My husband simply walked away, leaving Dad fuming. Cheryl testified next, bringing printouts of the group chat messages, which Mom's lawyer objected to repeatedly, but the judge allowed them as evidence of coordinated harassment. Cheryl's hands trembled as she read aloud their plans to ambush us at various locations. Patrick took the stand later in the afternoon. Patrick couldn't explain why he'd chosen to jog past our house, and he stumbled when asked about the birthday party intrusion. He'd clearly been coached, speaking softly about rehabilitation and redemption, and claiming he just wanted to be a part of his niece's lives to watch them grow up. His calm demeanor cracked when confronted with the victim impact statement from his case. During the lunch break, I discovered Mom had arranged for several church members to be present. They filled an entire row wearing matching crosses and shooting disapproving looks my way. One woman I recognized from Mom's Bible study group hissed at me in the bathroom. The CPS investigation results were then presented. Patricia herself testified that she'd found no evidence of abuse or neglect, and that the children were thriving and well-adjusted. Mom's lawyer tried to spin this as evidence that the girls needed their extended family, but it fell flat. My testimony came last, and I detailed every incident, every violation of boundaries, and every attempt to manipulate my daughters, as well as the letters they'd sent directly to them. I explained how we'd changed our entire lives to avoid Patrick's stalking. Mom's lawyer accused me of being paranoid and controlling, implying that I was using my children as weapons in a family feud. I remained calm, sticking to facts and documentation. The judge announced that he would review all evidence and make a decision within 3 days. Patrick made his move as we left the courtroom, stepping directly into my path and forcing me to stop. His eyes held a coldness that chilled me, and he leaned close enough for only me to hear his whispered threat about seeing the girls soon. My husband immediately positioned himself between us, and our lawyer documented the interaction. Patrick stepped back with a smirk, rejoining Mom and their attorney. The threat was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but the message was clear. That evening, we found our mailbox stuffed with letters from various relatives condemning our actions and demanding reconciliation. Someone had also left a Bible on our doorstep with specific verses about forgiveness highlighted in yellow. The next morning brought new challenges. Jane's teacher called to report that Beth had shown up at school claiming a family emergency. The school had followed our protocols and denied her access, but Beth had created a scene that upset several students. I drove to the school right away to speak with the principal, who showed me security footage of Beth arguing with the front desk staff and demanding to take the girls for a family emergency. When Beth was denied access to her nieces, she burst into tears. The principal assured me that they would keep a close eye on things, but suggested that we look into another school. The situation was causing havoc, and other parents were concerned. I left feeling defeated, knowing that Mom's campaign was working exactly as intended. At home, I found my husband installing additional cameras around our property. He'd taken the rest of the week off work after Dad showed up there again, this time with Uncle Helen's husband, and they'd attempted to corner him in the parking lot during lunch. Cheryl called that afternoon with disturbing news. The family group chat had turned into planning sessions for after the judge's decision. They talked about filing multiple legal actions to drain our resources, and some suggested showing up at the girls' activities to establish unintentional contact. I spent hours documenting these new threats for our lawyer, and each piece of evidence felt like another weight on my shoulders. The girls sensed the tension, becoming clingy and anxious. Elise had started having nightmares, but she couldn't explain what scared her. Patrick escalated further 2 days after the hearing, when he showed up at the grocery store where I was shopping with the girls. He didn't approach directly, but instead positioned himself where the girls would see him, waving enthusiastically and calling out their names. I rushed the girls out of the store, abandoning our cart. Jane asked why we were leaving without our groceries, and Elise asked why we couldn't talk to Uncle Patrick. Their innocent questions broke my heart as I struggled to explain without frightening them. That night we discovered someone had been in our backyard. Despite the fact that nothing was taken or damaged, our daughter's outdoor toys had been rearranged, their playhouse door was open, and 3 wrapped presents had been left inside. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during that exact time frame, so my husband called the police while I checked every lock and window. The officers took a report, but explained that without proof of forced entry or footage, there was little they could do. The gifts contained dolls dressed in bathing suits, like the one from Jane's party, and the psychological warfare was taking its toll. I jumped at every sound, checked locks obsessively, and barely slept. My husband began working from home to maintain constant vigilance. We were prisoners in our own lives, exactly what Mom and Patrick wanted. The morning of the judge's decision arrived with a thunderstorm, and we dressed carefully again, preparing for either outcome. I'd arranged for a trusted friend from my mother's group to watch the girls, someone completely disconnected from my family. The courthouse was even busier than before. In the courtroom, Patrick sat between Mom and their lawyer, dressed in a new suit, as if they were attending a wedding rather than attempting to force their children to be near a predator. Mom had rallied additional supporters, including several prominent church members, who wore color-coordinated outfits and carried signs promoting family unity. Mom clutched a handkerchief dramatically as the judge entered with a thick folder of documents and began reviewing the case. It was clear that someone had missed the memo on what family unity entails, as he kept turning to smile at family members who were playing the role of persecuted victim. He mentioned Patrick's completed sentence and rehabilitation programs, as well as the evidence of stalking, coordinated harassment, and a CPS complaint that appeared retaliatory. I felt my heart racing as he talked about the balance between protecting children and maintaining family bonds, citing cases where courts had reunified families after criminal convictions. Every word felt like another step toward losing everything we'd fought for. The judge's decision was mixed, but he did extend the restraining order for a year, citing the stalking behavior and harassment. The security footage showed clear patterns of stalking, the group chat messages showed coordinated harassment, and the birthday party incident demonstrated blatant disregard for boundaries. Mom's side erupted in whispers and movement, while others appeared satisfied with the partial victory, and Patrick's face showed fury beneath his calm facade. However, he granted Mom limited grandparent visitation rights, 1 supervised hour per month at a neutral location, with Patrick barred from attending. Beth stopped us in the hallway as we were about to leave. Our lawyer explained that the restraining order was now more difficult to challenge, and the supervised visitation gave us more control over the situation. We pushed through with our lawyer's assistance, ignoring shouted questions about denying children their family. Security intervened when she grabbed my arm, attempting to force me to listen, and her removal caused another scene of stares and whispers. We had won the main battle, but it had come at a high cost. Mom had her foot in the door now, and Patrick would undoubtedly use her visits to maintain indirect contact. Despite the security cameras, we discovered more gifts on our porch when we arrived home. This time, 3 identical necklaces with heart pendants. The message was clear. Patrick wasn't giving up. He'd simply found new ways to violate boundaries while technically following the court order. That evening, our lawyer called with concerning news. Mom's attorney had already filed paperwork requesting expanded visitation, claiming that the supervised visits were overly restrictive and harmful to the grandmother-grandchild relationship. After the girls had gone to bed, I talked with my husband and discussed our next steps, including relocating, changing schools, and even officially changing our names. It felt impossible to safeguard our daughters while keeping their normal lives. Cheryl texted screenshots from the family chat where they were celebrating Mom's partial victory and strategizing how to use the visit strategically. Some suggested having Patrick unexpectedly appear at the visitation location, while others talked about wearing recording devices to gather evidence against me. The next morning brought new challenges. Jane's best friend's mother called to politely uninvite her from a sleepover because word had spread about the courthouse drama and Patrick's presence on the registry. She was sorry, but she had to think of all the children's safety. I understood her position, but Jane's face crumbled when I explained. My husband's parents, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, finally called to offer their support, but suggested that we might be handling things too harshly. She couldn't understand why she was being punished for adult problems, and Elise and our youngest became whiny and difficult as a result. Their well-meaning ignorance hurt more than outright hostility. We spent the week establishing new routines around the court orders. I met with the supervised visitation coordinator to establish strict protocols. No gifts, no photos, no messages to relay. Mom would have exactly 60 minutes to visit under professional supervision. The first visit was scheduled for the following week. I carefully prepared the girls, explaining that Grandma would visit them at a special location. They seemed excited but confused about the restrictions. Jane asked if Uncle Patrick would be there as well, and my heart sank at having that conversation again. Meanwhile, Patrick found legal ways to stay in our lives. He volunteered at community events we'd previously attended, and he joined organizations where we had memberships, always keeping the required distance but ensuring we knew he was there. Dad escalated his own campaign, showing up at my husband's workplace despite warnings, waiting in the parking lot with Bible verses and printed articles about forgiveness. Security eventually barred him from the property, but he simply moved to the public sidewalk, and Beth began her own harassment via social media. She created multiple accounts to message our friends, sharing her version of events. She painted me as mentally unstable, claiming I was denying my children loving family relationships. Some friends distanced themselves, unsure what to believe. The stress manifested physically as I developed migraines and insomnia. My husband's blood pressure skyrocketed, and the girls began acting out at school, their grades slipping. We began family therapy, which added to our mounting legal bills, and our lawyer warned us that Mom's team was preparing a larger strategy, hiring a private investigator to document our lives, looking for any ammunition. Every public outing became a potential trap, and every interaction with the girls could be twisted into evidence. One morning, I caught Patrick photographing our house from a legal distance. Cheryl's family group chat revealed their long-term plans, which included waiting out the restraining order while gathering evidence of parental alienation. He made certain I saw him, even waving at the security camera, and he was also documenting everything. We installed panic buttons throughout the house and established code words with the girls. If anyone approached them unexpectedly, they were to find a trusted adult right away. They coached each other on what to document and how to present themselves as victims. The weight of transforming my children into cautious, fearful versions of themselves crushed me every day. A week before the first supervised visit, Mom sent a formal letter through her lawyer requesting permission to bring photo albums to share family history with the girls. When we declined, she accused us of cultural erasure and denying the children their heritage. As the visit approached, Patrick became more assertive and began visiting businesses near the visitation center, establishing legitimate reasons to be there. He couldn't enter during the visit, but he could position himself nearby and the law was on his side. I met with the visitation supervisor to express my concerns, and she assured me that their protocols were strict, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She had dealt with families like ours before, and she knew how determined individuals could circumvent even the best safeguards. None of us slept well the night before the first visit, and the girls sensed our anxiety. Jane frequently inquired if something was wrong. Elise clung to me, and our youngest returned to behaviors she'd outgrown months before. That morning I dressed the girls carefully, wanting them to seem well cared for while not giving Mom any reason to keep them away from her. My hands shook as I braided their hair, and my husband double-checked the recording device our lawyer had permitted us to carry. The visitation center was a converted house designed to feel comfortable while maintaining security, and we came early to familiarize the kids with the surroundings. The supervisor took the girls to the visitation room while we waited in a separate area. Mom arrived on time, dressed impeccably, and carrying a small bag. Her face lit up as she saw the girls through the window, and for a brief moment, I saw the grandmother she could have been if she hadn't chosen Patrick over their safety. I watched on the closed-circuit monitor as Mom hugged them sadly. She had brought approved coloring papers and crayons for 30 minutes, and it appeared to be a normal grandmother visit. Then Mom began her manipulation, talking about missing family events and how sorry everyone was. The supervisor redirected her several times, but Mom was skilled at subtle emotional manipulation. When the visit ended, the girls were confused and upset. They didn't understand why they couldn't see Grandma at her house, or why Uncle Patrick couldn't visit either. The car ride home was filled with questions that I struggled to answer honestly, without further damaging them. That afternoon, our lawyer called. Patrick had filed his own petition claiming defamation and emotional distress, claiming that our false accusations had harmed his reputation and relationships. I'm curious why the judge would grant visitation rights in the face of documented stalking and harassment. It was a clear vindictive move, but fighting it would cost us more money. During the second visit, Mom brought a family scrapbook she had compiled, and the war of attrition continued. Every legal filing drained our savings, every harassment incident shattered our peace, and every manipulation attempt harmed our children's innocence. The supervisor had accepted it after checking for objectionable content, but Mom had been clever. She'd included images of Patrick at every family milestone, portraying him as the beloved uncle the girls were missing. Our lawyer filed a motion to dismiss the defamation lawsuit, but the judge allowed it to proceed to discovery, which included depositions and documents. The girls absorbed every word, their confusion growing. When they returned to the waiting area, Jane immediately asked why Uncle Patrick couldn't attend the visits if he was so nice. Patrick's strategy was clear: he drained us financially while maintaining his victim narrative. The family's coordination reached new heights, as various relatives began to show up at the girls' activities. An aunt would show up at dance class, a cousin at soccer practice, and they maintained legal distance while making their presence felt. Other parents began to notice the pattern of family members lurking around. Cheryl continued to feed me information from the group chat. They developed a rotation schedule to maintain constant pressure without any individual violating the restraining order. They documented every sighting of us, building what they called their alienation portfolio. 3 weeks after the court decision, I discovered Mom had enrolled in the same gym where I took yoga classes. She attended different sessions, but I always saw her in the parking lot. The girls' behavior deteriorated further. Jane became withdrawn and stopped inviting friends over. Elisa's nightmares worsened, but she still couldn't explain what scared her, and our youngest began having tantrums reminiscent of her toddler years. The family therapist suggested that the constant tension was affecting them more than we realized. Patrick's current strategy was escalated when he got a job at a hardware store 2 blocks from the visitation center, giving him a legitimate reason to be in the area during every visit. I noticed his truck parked strategically where we'd have to pass it entering and leaving, and Mom pushed the boundaries even further during the third supervised visit. She gave each girl a locket with family photos inside, including Patrick. The supervisor forced her to remove them, but the damage had already been done. The girls didn't understand why they couldn't keep Grandma's gifts. Our financial situation deteriorated due to legal fees, therapy costs, and security measures. My husband took on extra shifts while I freelanced from home to avoid leaving the girls with sitters, and the stress showed in both of our faces, with dark circles becoming permanent fixtures. Then came the accident, or what appeared to be an accident. I was backing out of a parking space at the grocery store when another car hit me, and the driver jumped out, apologizing profusely. Only when I saw Uncle Helen's son did I realize this was orchestrated. The deposition for Patrick's defamation case was scheduled for the following month, and our lawyer prepared me for grueling questions designed to make me appear unstable. They'd use every family incident, every protective measure, as evidence of my irrational behavior. Toward a reformed man, he insisted on calling the cops and creating an official report that painted me as distracted and careless. Mom's visitation requests increased. She petitioned for unsupervised visits, citing the successful supervised sessions, and included affidavits from family members attesting to her character and my unreasonable restrictions. Each filing required a response, which cost money we didn't have. I began noticing cars following me on errands, different vehicles, but always maintaining the same careful distance. When I mentioned it to our lawyer, he said proving coordination would be nearly impossible. They'd learned from the group chat evidence to be more careful. The fourth supervised visit brought new manipulation. Mom spent the entire hour telling the girls about family traditions they were missing: birthday parties, holiday gatherings, summer barbecues, all of which were portrayed as magical events stolen from them. Patrick began jogging past the visitation center during our visits, timing it perfectly to cross our path, and waving at the girls through the window while maintaining legal distance. The supervisor documented it, but technically he wasn't violating any orders. Our home became a fortress of anxiety. Patrick's lawyer interrogated me for 6 hours, questioning me about every decision I'd made since his release. I struggled to explain why we lived as if we were hiding without frightening them or poisoning them against the family they still loved. We added more cameras, window sensors, and kept the curtains drawn at all times. They portrayed my protective measures as paranoid delusions, and my documentation as obsessive behavior. I kept my cool, but inside I was cracking. 2 days later, Jane's teacher called with concerns. Jane had written a story about a family torn apart by a mean mother who wouldn't let anyone visit, and the teacher recognized the emotional distress and suggested additional counseling. Another expense, another acknowledgement of how this war was harming my children. Mom's next action was calculated. She began attending the same church we'd shifted to, and after leaving hers, she sat across the sanctuary, dabbing at tears during services. Churchgoers who didn't know our tale saw a grandma split from her grandchildren, and some began avoiding us. My husband suggested borrowing from his 401k, but I knew that would only delay the inevitable. Patrick had hired a second attorney, someone known for aggressive litigation, and the message was clear. They could afford to escalate, whereas we couldn't. During the fifth supervised visit, something shifted, and Mom dropped her careful facade for a brief moment. When the supervisor stepped out briefly to use the restroom, Mom quickly whispered something to the girls. I couldn't hear it through the monitor, but I saw their faces change. Jane looked scared, and Elise was confused in the car. Afterward, neither girl would tell me what Grandma had said. They exchanged glances but remained silent. That night, I found them huddled together in Jane's bed, whispering. When I entered, they immediately stopped talking. The secret Mom had planned. Patrick filed additional motions in his defamation case, claiming lost wages from jobs he couldn't get due to my slander, and requesting access to my social media accounts, email records, and personal journals. Our lawyer fought each request, but judges frequently favored broad discovery, and the family's pressure campaign evolved. Instead of making direct contact, they started a whisper campaign in our community, sending anonymous letters to parents at school, calling local businesses to question our mental stability, and gradually shrinking our world. Cheryl warned me that Mom was planning something for the holidays, and the group chat was filled with cryptic references to Christmas justice and reunion planning. The sixth supervised visit was scheduled for December 23rd, and Mom arrived with a bag of wrapped presents that the supervisor had to inspect. Each gift was appropriate, including books, puzzles, and art supplies, but each contained subtle reminders of what the girls were missing. That evening, I discovered why the girls had been secretive. Elise finally broke down and told me what Grandma had whispered. Uncle Patrick had gifts for them hidden at her house, special gifts he'd made himself, and they could have them if they could persuade Mommy to let them visit. The manipulation was masterful, and my children now had a secret with their grandmother. They didn't understand why I was being mean about presents, and Jane accused me of ruining Christmas. On Christmas Eve, we discovered 3 packages on our doorstep, left at 3 a.m. by someone in dark clothing who knew exactly where our blind spots were. Inside were handmade dolls clearly crafted with patience and skill, as evidenced by the security cameras. The card simply said, "Love, Uncle Patrick," in neat handwriting. I wanted to throw them away, but the girls had already seen them. Taking the dolls would make me the villain who stole Christmas presents, and keeping them indicated Patrick had successfully invaded our home once more. My husband and I exchanged worried glances over the girls' heads as they opened their presents on Christmas morning, clearly thinking about the dolls in the garage and the mysterious gifts at Grandma's house. I made a compromise and put them in the garage, promising that we'd figure it out later. The day after Christmas, our lawyer called with bad news. The judge in Patrick's defamation case had partially ruled in his favor, dismissing the wage loss claims but finding that I had potentially damaged his reputation beyond the scope of protecting my children, and a trial would determine damages. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the legal documents, because we couldn't afford a trial. The retainer alone would bankrupt us. Mom and Patrick had won their war of financial attrition. I had to make an impossible choice: surrender or lose everything fighting. That night, I found my husband in the garage, looking at the dolls Patrick had made, each of which was crafted with disturbing detail and dressed like our daughters. The implications made my skin crawl, but legally they were just gifts from an uncle, and we had no proof of sinister intent. The next morning, Jane's best friend's mother called to say they were switching schools. The drama surrounding our family had become too much, and other parents were considering doing the same. During the 7th supervised visit, I instructed our lawyer to offer a settlement in Patrick's defamation case, despite the fact that the number made me sick. As I watched Mom manipulate my daughters with practiced ease, seeing their growing resentment toward me, and feeling the financial news tightening, I realized I had to change tactics. I couldn't win by playing defense anymore. Despite the fact that we didn't have $30,000, the settlement came with conditions Patrick couldn't refuse, including a permanent no-contact agreement that went beyond the restraining order. Patrick accepted the settlement, probably thinking he'd find a way around it later, and we had to liquidate our retirement accounts to pay for it. Despite the fact that it felt like paying a ransom to a kidnapper, Mom's reaction was swift and vicious. She filed for expanded visitation rights, claiming the settlement proved I'd been wrong about Patrick, but our lawyer had anticipated this, and the settlement included Patrick's acknowledgement that continued contact could be detrimental to the children's well-being. The judge who reviewed Mom's petition saw through her manipulation. He observed a pattern of escalating behavior, coordinated harassment, and the use of supervised visits to undermine parental authority. Instead of expanding access, he reduced it to quarterly visits with stricter supervision. Mom's investment in Patrick had cost her everything, including her retirement savings, relationship with her grandchildren, and now her limited access. The family group chat erupted in rage and disbelief, and Cheryl sent me screenshots of their outburst. Some blamed Mom for pushing too hard, while others blamed Patrick for taking the money. The coalition that had terrorized us for months had fractured into bitter factions, and we used the breathing room to rebuild. Jane's school agreed to put in more security measures. We found a new therapist who specialized in family manipulation dynamics, and we gradually, carefully, began explaining the age-appropriate truth to the girls about why Uncle Patrick couldn't be around them. The quarterly visits with Mom became less traumatic, and with stricter supervision and reduced frequency, she couldn't maintain the same manipulation. The girls began to see her as a distant relative rather than a central figure in their lives. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. 6 months later, Patrick violated the no-contact agreement by sending birthday cards to each girl through a third party. Our lawyer immediately filed for contempt, and this time, the judge had no patience. Patrick faced jail time or a substantial fine, which he chose, further draining Mom's resources because she was still funding his legal battles. The extended family eventually fled. Without Mom's money to fund their campaign, and with legal barriers entrenched, most found it simpler to move on. A few remained, but their individual efforts lacked the coordinated impact of the group onslaught. On the anniversary of Patrick's release, I sat in my backyard watching my daughters play. We'd paid a terrible price, financial ruin, family destruction, months of terror, but they were safe. Their innocence was scarred, but not shattered. My husband joined me, bringing coffee. We didn't need words. We'd survived by choosing the battles we could win, and accepting the costs of those we couldn't. The war wasn't over. As I hugged them close, I reflected on the cost of protection. It would never be perfect, but we'd accomplished what was most important. The girls ran up to us, their faces beaming with joy. They'd adapted to our new normal with the resilience of children, and they now understood why some family members weren't safe, why love sometimes meant keeping distance. Every parent would pay it without hesitation, but few understood the true cost until the bill came due. We'd paid in money, relationships, and innocence, but watching my daughters play safely in our yard, I knew I'd pay it again. The restraining order would need to be renewed eventually. Mom would get her quarterly visits, and Patrick would most likely probe for new weaknesses, but for the time being my daughters are safe. I found it strange how the mother aged so much when she lost. Was she actually believing she was doing the right thing, or was this all about control from the start? Sometimes the only triumph that matters is surviving each struggle and preserving what you love most.